Okay, what everybody wants to know, the 250 versus the new 300. There's people talking about now that you can get a good deal on 2012 250. They don't want to wait for the 2013 300 because they can get a better deal on it or whatever. So now's really the time to buy, whether you are going to go with the 250 or the 300. What I would say, if you're in the market for a new bike, go for the 300. If it's your first bike, don't buy a brand new $5,000 motorcycle. That's just stupid. Pick up a used 250 for $1,500. That's not the point of this video. The point is comparing the two bikes, just because there's a lot of people that haven't had the opportunity to ride this bike yet, and they're curious about how it stacks up, because the dyno graph can really only tell you so much. As far as peak power, from what I read, I kind of assumed this thing would have a little bit more top end than it does, but I guess it is a parallel twin. So just like the 250R, the 500R, and the 650R, it's not going to pull like crazy at the top end. So I think some mods will free it up a little bit and get some top end gains out of it. But as of right now, I'm willing to bet that the dyno graph is pretty flat, from just like it was on the 250. The biggest thing about this bike is it has low end power. I can get on the freeway, I get on a ramp going 40 miles an hour and I'm in 6th gear and roll on the throttle, 4,000 RPMs or so, and it just pulls. And it doesn't, I'm not saying it pulls like a 650R or something. I'm saying it pulls like you don't have to downshift, and it pulls at a reasonable rate of speed, and you can merge onto the freeway or whatever. It's just really impressive for such a small bike, for 300 cc's. The 250, you're used to downshifting it to pass on the freeway, used to downshifting it to accelerate, keeping it in a lower gear to merge and things like that. This bike, you don't really need to do that. The power band is excellent. It rivals a lot of bigger bikes as far as just the overall rideability. If you're looking at inline 4-cylinder bikes, especially like a 600, they're not going to have low-end power. So really, if you're looking at the lower RPMs, this bike's going to pull as well as those bikes, really low down. And as for street riding, that's kind of what you want. And that's why a lot of people prefer 1000 over 600 for street, because of the extra low-end pull. And the 600s are usually pretty gutless, low down. This bike, it gets up into the mid-range really quickly because of the gearing. And then you'll notice, riding it though, one of the differences I noticed between the 250 and the 300 is that the 300, once you hit 6th gear, I think Kawasaki must have extended the 6th gear quite a bit, so it's got a little bit taller gearing. When you drop it into 6, the RPMs drop considerably. So 1 through 5 seem to be what you'd expect as far as the spacing, and then they kind of made 6th, pushed it out a little bit like an overdrive gear. And that's great for the freeway because it's not quite screaming up there and the RPMs is bad. I think at 65 miles an hour, I was just over 7,000 RPMs, which is pretty reasonable. And then, get up to 80 miles an hour and you're only at 87, 8,800 RPMs. And the bike red line's up, I think, the same as the old one, 1,300. But one of the more impressive things right now, fuel economy. While they up the displacement, up the power, fuel economy is only improved. The fuel gauge has 6 bars on it. I've ridden 182 miles so far, and I have half of a tank, apparently. I don't know how accurate that is because it was at 2 bars and it's gone back up to 3. It has a little eco riding indicator. It does not give you fuel economy. It just gives you the odometer, trip A, trip B, and a clock. It doesn't state the actual average miles per gallon or instantaneous miles per gallon. But when you're not on it hard, a little eco light will pop up. It's a little triangle kind of shaped thing that says it's eco, to let you know that you're riding more fuel efficiently, I guess you would say. But as far as overall rideability of this bike, it's so much better than the 250R. Especially freeway riding, that's one of the big complaints on the 250. It never bothered me. I've ridden the 250 probably thousands of miles of freeway. I was always fine with the power of it, but part of that's due to maybe how comfortable I am on a bike in general, because I have a little bit more riding experience than most 250 riders. This bike feels much more planted, much more solid, not as susceptible to the crosswinds on the freeway. Since the tires are new and it's not very top heavy, It's tippy kind of in a good way. It's easy to toss it from side to side, and when you're driving around town, once the tires flatten out a little bit from a lot of street riding, it's going to be feel a little bit more stable. Also, the tires are more narrow, obviously, than my 600RR, so that's a big difference. But anyway, back to this versus the 250R. Looks department, that's subjective. I think it looks great, much better than the 250. I really hated the headlights on the 250, that single headlight. Even though there was two bulbs, it was the one housing, I didn't like it. This looks a lot sleeker to me, a little bit more modern. Some people think it's kind of a bug-eyed look or whatever, so that's, again, subjective. Stopping power feels, I don't know if they've upgraded the front brakes or not. Doesn't feel any better than the 250R. It's adequate, so I can't really speak to that. The ABS model is only that green, the ebony and green special edition model, so I didn't spring for the ABS. It's not even out yet, but when it is, I don't like that green, and I don't want to pay $200 for a paint scheme that I don't like. It's just not going to happen. So white was the only option, unless I wanted to wait for black. Never owned a white bike, and I've had plenty of black ones, so I stuck with the white. I think the exhaust pipe looks great. It looks a little bit higher quality than you'd expect from this class of bike, the entry-level bike. People are already complaining that your heel touches the exhaust. It has a heat shield, so I don't really anticipate that being a problem. I haven't melted any boots on it yet. You can feel it, though, if you keep your feet far back. Obviously, the tank pad was an add-on. Gorgeous new digital speedometer with an analog tack. I think Kawasaki was smart about the Ninja 650. What they did, they had switched it over to the all-digital, like a Ducati. I don't think it was really popular. I didn't personally like it at all, and that's the reason I didn't buy the redesigned 650R. I thought about it. But on this bike and on the 650R, they've gone to the analog tack with a digital speedometer, which is a really popular setup for sport bikes. And I really prefer it over the analog speedometer or over the all-digital setup. This sounds pretty much like a 250. Nothing real impressive in the sound department. I'm sure a little bit of modification to the stock exhaust, or maybe a Two Brothers system or Leo vents whenever they come out, will be the way that I go, and it's going to improve that a lot. But overall, so far, I've been really impressed with this bike. It's exceeded my expectations, and I had pretty lofty expectations for it, just from all the hype and from looking at the spec sheets, the dynographs, and everything. It's such a usable power band with a ton of mid-range power for this size of motor. It's a phenomenal little bike, and if you're in the market for maybe even a 650R, it rides more like a baby 650. If you watch my other video review of this bike, you'll see the same thing. But the 250R, this doesn't feel like a punched out 250 motor. It feels more like a 650 with less power, just because the way the power band is. The mid-range is so beefy. The top end's not really, it's about the same as the mid-range, so there's not really a transition to top end. And that could probably be fixed with some modifications once you can tune it, put exhaust on it and everything else. Squeeze a little bit more out of the top end. But other than that, if you like the looks of the redesign, I would not buy a carbureted 250. Now that this thing's fuel injected, it fires right up at the touch of a button. It's just a dream to ride. There's no warm-up period or anything like that. The bike it rides great. It's pretty stiff, but the suspension is adjustable, as you can see down there. So with a passenger on it, it seems about right, but it's over 300 pounds. I'm only 200 pounds or so, or maybe a little less, and it's really stiff for me even. That doesn't bother me, so I'm going to leave it as is because I ride 2-up quite a bit, but that's just another thing to notice is it's going to ride stiffer, more like a 600. The 250 felt kind of squishy. The suspension did. This thing feels really refined. Maybe a little stiff, but definitely refined. It handles great for a bike in this class. So if you're thinking about picking one up, do it.